All right, let's talk about realistic options of replacing Nick Bosa on the defensive line, how the San Francisco 49ers are going to go about this. And I've already talked about on previous videos. There's no replacing Nick Bosa. I think even Kyle Shanahan just said that on his press conference. You're not replacing this guy, which I agree with because he is one of the best players in the league. You don't just replace these guys. If anything, it is going to have to be by committee based on the guys they have in the building, or the San Francisco 49ers are also going to have to go and seek a trade. Kyle Shanahan was asked about this. It did sound like, he is open to it, but he also did mention that you're not just going to go out here and make a trade just because, right? You're going to have to be smart about it. You're going to have to be able to make a trade because it makes sense, it makes you better, and all of those different types of things. And again, it's really challenging to be able to just replace a guy like Nick Bosa. So these are some of the options. I've already talked about them, but I wanted to put them into one video and just kind of condense it all here. I think, there's names, right? Kayvon Thibodeaux, Brian Burns. You guys know I love Brian Burns. Will we bring him back to BB Hive? Is the Hive buzzing again? Do we make that call and say, hey, give us Brian Burns? Even though the Giants did pay for him, I'm sure if you were watching football last night, you saw Brian Burns go crazy and you could see why I would absolutely love the idea of Brian Burns. However, I don't know if he is the best fit. As much as I do love Brian Burns, as much as I do want the San Francisco 49ers to trade for him and bring back my draft crush to the San Francisco 49ers, I don't know if that makes the most sense because I do think that you have to make a move here that doesn't impact you in the long term. Because obviously, yes, this year, Nick Bosa, he won't be available. But it does mean he most likely will be available next season. These guys recover from ACL injuries. This is actually Nick Bosa's third ACL injury, uh, where he's required surgery to repair a torn ACL. And keep in mind, he won Defensive Player of the Year after he tore it in 2020. So he can return and he can come back and he can play at a high level. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. So I think what you have to do is you have to target someone who is likely on an expiring contract, can be traded for a rental, and you use the quotes rental because they're going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. That makes the cost for compensation much lower in order to go and acquire said player because you're not acquiring a multi-year contract to keep you under team control. So it allows you to go out and get a player for a relatively good price. Just think about how when the 49ers traded for Chase Young. At the time, he still had a lot of cachet. A lot of people still believed there was a lot of potential there. And the 49ers got him for a third round draft pick. And so I think that's the type of move you're trying to make. However, you're not trying to get Chase Young because unfortunately Chase Young didn't turn out to be a guy that I think the 49ers could rely on like what they thought they were getting. So I do believe that you got to go after someone like Trey Hendrickson. I really do think he is actually a realistic option and he's the best option because he is older, 31 years old. He has back-to-back seasons with 18 sacks. He typically plays around 60 to 70% of the snaps. So a lot of those being, pass rush type situations. But he also plays base down. He's not obviously playing 100% of the snaps, but neither is Nick Bosa. He's a similar type defensive end. Can play in the wide nine, hand in the dirt. I think he would fit the scheme. And then when you look at his kind of contract setup, which I do think is one of the most important aspects of it, because it also relates to the compensation, is that he's in the final year of his deal. They did re-extend him to rework his contract to a 1 year, $29 million contract. The cap hit is pretty large. I think it's about $25 million if I'm not mistaken. So the 49ers would have to take on that cap hit. And, the Bengals would also have to take on a dead cap hit. However, when you look at the Bengals, they don't got Joe Burrow for the next 3 months. Trey Hendrickson is not someone in their future plans. That's why he held out, and they didn't pay him a multi-year deal. They just ripped up his deal and just reworked the final year of his deal. So what that signals to me is, if you're the Bengals, go and get some value for Trey Hendrickson. Go and get something for him other than just a compensatory pick after he leaves in free agency. So the San Francisco 49ers could offer a third. They could offer a third and a fifth. Maybe they go as high as a second. I don't love that as much as like a combo third and fifth, or even a third and fourth, or something like that. I would prefer to stay in that range. If you had to give up a day two pick straight up, I may consider it. Um, but I do think that you're not going to have to give up a first rounder. You're going to get one of the top defensive ends in the league. You're going to get a guy who can plug and play right away and fit in. You're not bringing him in here for the long term. And again, the other thing that you have to keep in mind is that, I guess it doesn't really matter, because I would say he would register for a comp pick if he were able to leave in free agency. Um, but I think the 49ers, I guess that accounted for last year. I guess he would, I don't know. So I don't know how that comp pick formula would work, because I was thinking they've already have the max amount allotted, which was 4 compensatory picks from Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, and Aaron Banks, those other guys. But I don't think if they were to have Trey Hendrickson this year and he left next year, I think that would count towards that following year. So actually, Trey Hendrickson might actually count against the compensatory pick formula, very similar to what Chase Young did. So that's kind of the workaround here, is that you give up a pick, but you can earn it back from the compensatory formula. So it's actually really not that bad. I think the thing that the 49ers have shown that they're a little bit hesitant to do is pick up the contract, the dollars. Um, like we saw with the Brian Robinson trade, they were willing to give up the pick, but you had to take on the contract. They took on like a third of his contract, and it was only like 3 million plus. This contract is a lot bigger. I'm not really sure how the cap carryover works in this situation, because we do know that the 49ers typically like to keep the cap space so that they can roll it over to the following year for cap alleviation and cap management. That's why they have like probably upwards of 40 to 50 million in available cap space right now. But obviously, if you go out and you trade for a Trey Hendrickson, you're eating up a lot of that. And I'm not familiar if he leaves in free agency, do you get that cap space back to then roll over to the following year? That seems like it would make sense to me, but again, I'm not a cap expert. Um, I'm I know just enough to just be dangerous, just enough to be dangerous, which is kind of where we're at. So, Kayvon Thibodeaux is an option. I don't love it. I think he has the athletic upside and profile, but I just don't feel like he's a fit. Um, I think, personality wise, the 49ers have put a really large emphasis on that. I'm not sure he's that type of guy. Jordan Phillips is an interesting name from the Miami Dolphins. I really like Jordan Phillips coming out of the draft. He got a lot of heat for his injuries in the pre-draft process. I think he even medically retired in college due to injuries, but he was able to come back, bounce back, transferred to Miami, I believe it was, from UCLA, and became a first-round draft pick. Now he's lived up to the pedigree, in my opinion, except he's been injured, and he's had some pretty severe injuries So I think you would be able to get him at a pretty solid price in regards to draft pick compensation. So there is risk there. You're going after a guy who is coming off a season-ending injury, so there's risk involved. And I'm sure I can see the comments below, like, "Oh, he has injuries." Absolutely not, which I understand. Um, but a part of it is, again, risk reward. How much does he cost? Is he cost effective? If he's cost effective, then that might make sense for the 49ers to take on said risk if they don't have to give up too much, yada, yada, yada. So we'll see. I do think there are some options, but again, no other option can come close to what Nick Bosa can provide that I really do think would be available to get in a trade other than Trey Hendrickson. I really, I would love nothing more to have Brian Burns, but I really do believe that Trey Hendrickson could come in and give you shades of Bosa, could give you some of that juice, could give you something very close. Obviously, not apples to apples, obviously, not the same thing, but I think you could get him, and I don't think you'd have to give up a ton. I think you could get him for a reasonable price. You just have to be willing to take on his contract, and that is where I am not sure the 49ers are willing to do that. So, you guys let me know what you think about these options. If you have any better options, let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about that, because I'm open and willing to any and all crazy trade scenarios. So let me know in the comments below, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.